Welcome back to my channel African Tales by Ify. On today's episode is a tale spun from the shadowed alleys and gleaming towers of a city where ambition is currency and trust, a dangerous gamble. Tonight, we delve into a story of whispered promises and shattering truths, a narrative woven with threads, ambition, and the sharp, cold edge of betrayal. Prepare to journey with me into the heart she gave, betrayal in the city of power. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink, and let the city lights outside your window fade as we step into a world where every smile hides a secret and every heart holds a vulnerability. This is not just a story. It's an echo from the very soul of a metropolis built on dreams and broken by deceit. Are you ready to listen? In the polished heart of Abuja, where glass towers kissed the sky and powerful men played chess with the lives of the forgotten, Lizzy lived her dream. Or so she thought. She was married to Ken, a respected entrepreneur with influence spanning beyond the corridors of the National Assembly. To the world, they were the perfect Abuja couple, he tall and ambitious with a smooth tongue, and she soft and round-bodied, motherly, and fiercely devoted. Their marriage was the envy of their church community, their photographs gracing society pages, their hashtags trending on Instagram after every getaway to Dubai or Cape Town. But beneath the glamour of Jabi Lake dinners and Asokoro garden parties, life had its own cruel plans. Ken's health deteriorated rapidly, his body betraying him in the form of kidney failure. The doctors at Nisa Premier Hospital gave him a grim verdict. He needed a kidney transplant. His siblings and friends quietly disappeared behind their tinted SUVs, unwilling to risk their bodies for him. In the darkness of the ICU, it was Lizzy who stepped forward, offering a piece of herself, saying, "What is love if not sacrifice?" Her sacrifice was splashed across blogs, hailed as the ultimate act of devotion. Even politicians praised her bravery. Ken survived. The surgery was a success. And Abuja, that city of whispers and masks, moved on. But for Lizzy, the story was only just beginning as she began to put on weight from medications post-surgery. With his new lease on life, Ken emerged from the hospital with fresh vigor, his charm sharper, his ambitions even more ruthless. He began spending more nights in the hidden VIP rooms of Abuja's exclusive clubs, mingling with women half his age who knew nothing of the woman who gave him life. His eyes no longer saw Queen's curves as the softness of love, but as flaws in a city obsessed with perfection. He avoided her gaze, embarrassed to be seen in public with a woman the city now labeled matronly. The whispers came fast. People who once envied Lizzy now pitied her behind designer sunglasses. They said, she gave him her kidney but lost his love. The gossip circles of Maitama and Woos buzzed with stories of Ken's new mistress, Bola, a slender, ambitious socialite with connections to Abuja's power brokers. Bola was everything Ken now craved, a trophy, a statement, a woman who wouldn't remind him of ICU nights and hospital smells. Lizzy watched silently as her husband drifted into the arms of another, her nights spent alone in their marble-floored mansion in Gorimpa, crying into silk pillows that once heard promises of forever. She tried everything to hold on: spa makeovers, gym memberships, even consultations with Abuja's most expensive stylists. But Ken had already replaced her, not just in his heart but in their social circle. The day the divorce papers arrived, delivered coldly by a smiling courier in a gleaming suit, was the day Lizzy realized Abuja wasn't built for women like her. It was a city that celebrated shiny facades but turned its back on wounded hearts. The same society that cheered her sacrifice now shared memes of her, mocking her weight, calling her a cautionary tale of women who let themselves go. She locked herself away in their once shared mansion, the laughter of her past haunting every chandelier, every corridor lined with photos of a love that was now just curated content on her private Instagram account. Ken moved out publicly, flaunting his new arm candy at every state function, their romance becoming tabloid headlines. In the stillness of those nights, Lizzy's pain fermented into something stronger. The city that tried to break her forgot that the deepest scars often birth the fiercest warriors. Lizzy wiped her tears, painted her lips with the color of survival, and prepared to reclaim the city that tried to silence her. Lizzy didn't flee the city that betrayed her, she owned it. She began attending wellness events, first as a silent participant, then as a speaker. She shared her story not as a victim, but as a survivor. Women flocked to her gatherings, relating to the tales of betrayal behind glass doors, of marriages that left them empty after giving everything. She founded Heart of Lizzy, a foundation aimed at helping women who gave too much and received too little. Her once hushed story became a movement. She appeared on television shows, featured in podcasts, even gracing magazine covers not for her pain, but for her rebirth. The same Abuja influencers who once mocked her now reposted her quotes, singing her praises. Meanwhile, Ken's fairy tale with Bola collapsed under the weight of fraud allegations and public disgrace. The city that once cheered him now turned its back. He tried crawling back into Lizzy's life, calling, pleading, but she had built walls made not of spite, but of peace. She had given him her kidney once, but she would never give him her soul again. Abuja crowned Lizzy its new queen, not in politics or social events, but in the hearts of the broken and betrayed. She became a voice for every woman who dared to start over, who learned that dignity cannot be bought in woos markets or borrowed from a man's last name. She built centers for healing across the city, creating safe spaces where women wore their scars like crowns. She turned her Gwarimpa mansion into a shelter for survivors, filling its empty halls with laughter once more. Abuja learned that a woman's worth is not defined by her dress size or marital status, but by the fire she carries in her spirit. And when the night came and the city lights shimmered like false promises, Lizzy stood on her balcony overlooking the city that once broke her, smiling. She realized she wasn't just the woman who gave her kidney. She was the woman who gave herself a second chance. Lizzy's face became the symbol of quiet defiance in Abuja. Her pictures graced the covers of wellness magazines. She sat on panels discussing healing, betrayal, and dignity, often facing women who carried stories just like hers, abandoned, mocked, yet breathing. She told them how survival was not just a decision, it was a duty to themselves. The once empty halls of her Gwarimpa mansion now overflowed with women and children who found shelter under her wings. She partnered with NGOs and hospitals, raising funds for organ donors, ensuring no woman had to bleed quietly for a man who might forget her name. Journalists labeled her the Phoenix of Abuja, but Lizzy didn't care for titles anymore. She had discovered something deeper, power not given by a husband or society, but earned through scars, tears, and nights spent curled into herself, whispering affirmations into the void. Yet in the midst of her blossoming empire, Lizzy knew Abuja wasn't done testing her. In a city where egos inflated faster than egusi soup bubbles, power and jealousy were siblings. Men she once called friends now regarded her as a threat. Ken, watching from the shadows, brewed a storm of bitterness. Ken's downfall wasn't loud. It was slow, painful, and humiliating. The allegations started with whispers, embezzlement, failed tenders, unpaid loans. Bola, ever the social climber, had already jumped ship to another politician from the north. Ken found himself alone in a rented flat in Kubwa, a far cry from the penthouse they once shared in Maitama. His calls to old friends went unanswered. His name, once spoken with reverence, now triggered sneers in Abuja's social clubs. When his body began to weaken again, he turned to the same hospitals that once paraded him as a success story. But this time, no donor waited in the wings. Nurses barely acknowledged him. His pride prevented him from asking Lizzy for help, but his condition grew worse with each passing day. The powerful Ken had become a ghost haunting the corridors of a city that no longer feared him. It was during one of his lowest nights that he drunkenly stumbled upon a TV interview where Lizzy spoke about forgiveness. It pierced him deeper than any disease. But even as his tears wet his torn shirt, he knew Lizzy had moved on. Lizzy knew that healing was more than just moving on. It was about lifting others along the way. She created the Council of Broken Wings, a network of women from Abuja's slums, suburbs, and even glass-towered enclaves, all with stories soaked in betrayal. Together they created businesses, sold Ankara, launched wellness cafes, hosted empowerment dinners, and rewrote the rules of engagement in a city that told women they were nothing without men. One evening, as she sat by her balcony watching Abuja's city lights flicker like false promises, she received a visitor. It was Ngozi, the same lawyer who once delivered her divorce papers. This time, Ngozi came not with legal threats but with tears. Her own husband had thrown her out for a younger woman. Lizzy welcomed her with open arms, whispering, "You are not the first and you will not be the last, but you will rise." Abuja watched in awe as Lizzy's home became a citadel of new beginnings. The city couldn't ignore her anymore. Politicians sought her endorsement. Media outlets begged for her interviews. But Lizzy knew her throne wasn't built on fame. It was built on pain, and pain doesn't crave applause. Ken, now a shell of the man he once was, finally swallowed his pride and stood at the gates of Lizzy's mansion, clutching the IV bag from the rundown clinic he could barely afford. He begged to see her, his voice cracked, his body trembling. But when Lizzy appeared, flanked by women who now guarded her like warriors, she looked at him not with hate, but with pity. She listened as he groveled, as he cried, as he blamed the city, his weakness, even Bola. But when he finally asked for forgiveness, Lizzy simply said, "Forgiveness is for me, not for you. You will not find healing in the place you destroyed." She handed him a card for a shelter she built for men trying to rebuild their lives. That was the last charity she offered him. The media caught wind of the scene, capturing photos of Ken's broken figure leaving her gates, face hidden behind cheap sunglasses. Abuja gossiped, but Lizzy no longer cared. She understood now her healing wasn't about revenge. It was about never letting her past crawl back into her present. Abuja crowned Lizzy its queen, but queenship in the city of masks comes with thorns. There were those who resented her rise, men in powerful circles who felt threatened by a woman who taught others how to live without them. False stories circulated online, accusing her of exploiting women's pain for fame, mocking her body even as they feared her influence. But Lizzy remained unshaken. She knew that no throne, even one built on ashes, would come without snakes. She spoke louder, traveled further, wrote a book that climbed bestseller lists, and built safe houses in Abuja's darkest corners. And on the night of her birthday gala, as the who's who of Abuja gathered to honor her, Lizzy stood before them, wearing a gown stitched with symbols of resilience, and told them, "I am not here to make you comfortable. I am here to remind you that a woman's body is not her currency, and her love is not a death sentence." The hall roared in applause, and deep within the shadows, Ken, frail and forgotten, watched, knowing that he once held the heart of this woman and threw it into the gutters of Abuja. Lizzy's nights changed from lonely sobs into graceful solitude. She learned to sip her wine alone on the penthouse balcony, watching Abuja's skyline shimmer in silence. What was once a bitter loneliness became a quiet, powerful space of reflection. She realized that the world teaches women to fear being alone, to chase after scraps of love, but Abuja taught her that loneliness could become the soil where self-love blooms. She took dance classes, explored new cities, and even started painting, something she abandoned in her university days. Abuja noticed the change. Lizzy became an enigma, the woman who gave her kidney and yet danced alone in the city's most expensive restaurants without apology. She was no longer defined by her ex-husband, nor the betrayal that nearly broke her. She became known as the woman who turned heartbreak into a throne. But even queens bleed in private. On the night of her divorce anniversary, Lizzy stood in front of her old wedding photo, a glass of champagne trembling in her hand. She whispered to the version of herself in the picture, did your best. And she toasted to the girl she used to be, now buried in the ruins of love. Power attracts both allies and enemies. Within Lizzy's council of broken wings, a serpent slithered quietly. It was Chioma, a former socialite turned activist, whose envy toward Lizzy brewed behind masked smiles. She whispered into the ears of powerful men, sowing seeds of doubt about Lizzy's rise, telling them she was exploiting women's pain for profit. Her betrayal wasn't immediate. It was slow like poison in wine. She sabotaged Lizzy's deals, spread rumors among NGOs, and when the press picked up her lies, Abuja's chatter rooms lit up again. For a moment, Lizzy felt the weight of the world crushing her once more. But this time she didn't cry into silk pillows. She faced the snake with the grace of a lioness. At a press conference, Lizzy silenced the city. She laid bare her financials, her charities' receipts, and brought forth hundreds of women who testified to her impact. She didn't defend herself out of fear, but out of duty to the women she served. Chioma was exposed, her jealousy laid bare for all to see. The city devoured her, and Lizzy walked away head high, heart unshaken. The irony of life whispered into Lizzy's ear in the form of an old friend, Yemi. A widower, calm and steady like the Abuja sunset, Yemi saw Lizzy not as a broken woman, but as a warrior with battle scars that gleamed like jewels. He didn't try to save her. He simply sat beside her at fundraisers, walked with her through markets, and listened, truly listened. Lizzy resisted at first. Her heart, still coated in the dust of betrayal, refused to trust another man. But Yemi was patient. He reminded her that love, when pure, does not demand, does not rush, and never feeds on sacrifice. Slowly, cracks appeared in her fortress, and laughter crept into spaces once filled with silence. But even as she let him in, she warned him, "I will never again shrink for any man." And Yemi smiled, replying, "Then I will rise to meet you." Their story wasn't built on grand gestures, but on quiet moments, the way he held her hand during storms, the way he saw her not as a victim, but as a queen in her own right. Abuja never forgets its kings, no matter how dethroned. Ken, now penniless and sick, returned to the tabloids after collapsing at a cheap clinic in Nyanya. The media, hungry for scandal, reopened old wounds. They hunted Lizzy for comments, begging her to throw salt on her ex-husband's open wounds. But Lizzy refused to play their game. When they asked her what she felt seeing the man who abandoned her now begging for alms, she simply said, "I feel nothing. I left that chapter behind. My story has moved on." The world applauded her restraint, but deep inside, a small part of Lizzy mourned the man she once loved, the Lizzy of old, the man who used to hold her hand in crowded streets. She visited his bedside quietly one night, not as an ex-wife but as a human. She told him, "I forgave you long before you fell." She handed him the address of a rehabilitation center her foundation funded and left. She didn't stay to hear his reply. Closure wasn't for him, it was for her. Abuja crowned Lizzy's foundation with its highest humanitarian award at the Festival of New Queens, an event she created to honor women who rose from betrayal, abuse, and abandonment. The city's most powerful gathered under twinkling fairy lights, watching as women who once hid their pain now wore their strength like crowns. Lizzy, dressed in an emerald gown that celebrated every curve she once hated, stood at the podium, her voice steady. "We are no longer the women who gave too much. We are the women who learned to keep something for ourselves." The applause shook the ground, and tears flowed freely, not just from the women, but from men who finally saw what strength looked like in its most graceful form. That night, Abuja belonged to Lizzy and the broken women she taught to rise again. And in the crowd, Yemi stood not as a rescuer, but as an admirer of a woman who rebuilt her throne from the ashes of betrayal. Lizzy finally allowed herself a dinner date with Yemi at the famed Zuma Rock Garden restaurant, an exclusive spot where Abuja's elite gathered. She wore a simple, elegant gown, no longer feeling the need to impress the world, only herself. For the first time in years, she laughed without the weight of performance. Yemi listened more than he spoke, his eyes reflecting not lust but respect. Over bowls of ensala soup and glasses of palm wine, they spoke of everything: politics, childhood wounds, favorite books, and the type of love that doesn't burn but warms gently over time. Abuja's socialites watched them, curious, whispering tales of the once betrayed woman, now glowing beside a man who didn't need to compete with her spotlight. Yet Lizzy knew she was treading carefully. The city still held scars for women like her. Yemi understood. He didn't ask for her trust overnight. He earned it sip by sip, smile by smile. By the end of the evening, as they stood overlooking the city's glowing skyline, Lizzy whispered, "Perhaps not all endings are tragic." Yemi smiled, saying nothing, letting the quiet be their shared language. Despite the happiness Yemi brought into her life, Lizzy knew true healing demanded more. She embarked on a journey outside Abuja, visiting rural communities, reconnecting with her roots in Enugu, where her mother once taught her that a woman's strength wasn't in her waistline, but in her heart. She sat under the old Udala tree where she played as a child, letting the village women braid her hair, listening to their stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and survival. It reminded her that her pain wasn't unique, that women everywhere carried the burden of giving too much in a world that gave too little back. In those dusty streets, Lizzy left behind the last pieces of bitterness. She cried, danced, and allowed herself to be human again. When she returned to Abuja, she was lighter not in body, but in spirit. She no longer craved validation, she craved only peace. While Lizzy's star rose, Ken's empire collapsed fully. His properties were auctioned, his name wiped from Abuja's inner circles. Even Bola, the woman he once flaunted, abandoned him after the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission froze his last accounts. He became a cautionary tale, a meme in the city's gossip blogs. In a city that chewed and spat out the weak, Ken became invisible. He tried rebuilding from scraps, but his past sins haunted him like ghosts in a dark corridor. No bank would lend him money. No partner would trust his handshake. The streets he once drove through in convoys now became battlegrounds of humiliation. And still, Ken couldn't face himself in the mirror. His sickness returned, this time not in the body, but in the spirit. Even the church rejected his desperate confessions. Abuja moved on, and for the first time, Ken realized the weight of the woman he discarded. Lizzy transformed her Guarimpa mansion into a therapy garden called the Garden of Hope. Here, women and men came to heal, to rebuild, to remember that they were more than the betrayals they survived. It became a sanctuary where pain met purpose. She hosted open forums, poetry nights, and business workshops. She launched scholarship programs for children of abandoned mothers. Abuja's elite couldn't ignore her anymore. Governors, CEOs, and even first ladies sought her counsel. But Lizzy remained grounded, always reminding herself, "This is not about me. This is about the broken who need a lighthouse." Her foundation expanded into other states. What started as her personal healing journey became a movement. Women who once hid their scars now flaunted their crowns. Abuja learned a new kind of power, the kind that didn't roar but whispered. At a state banquet held in Transcorp Hilton, Lizzy was awarded Nigeria's Medal of Courage. As she stood on stage, wearing a dress stitched with symbols of healing, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. Even Yemi, now her fiancé, watched from the crowd with quiet pride. As she held the medal, she paused, remembering the woman who once sat crying into a pillow soaked in betrayal. She whispered to her old self, "You survived, Queen." She ended her speech not with bitterness, but with a proverb from her mother: "A woman's worth is not in how many times she is broken, but in how many times she rebuilds her throne." Abuja roared. And in the shadows, a frail broken Ken watched on a borrowed phone from a dingy bar in Karu, tears streaming down his face, not for Lizzy, but for the man he could have been. Abuja nights were getting colder, but Lizzy's heart was warmer than ever. The Garden of Hope now attracted global attention. Documentaries, interviews, and charity galas placed her at the center of conversations about forgiveness, healing, and women's empowerment. Yet one night, standing before her bathroom mirror, she caught a glimpse of the woman she once was, the scared, overweight wife who gave everything. It was at that moment Lizzy realized the journey never truly ends. Healing isn't a finish line but a daily practice. She touched the faint scar on her side where they took her kidney and smiled sadly. That scar no longer symbolized loss. It represented the life she saved, not just Ken's but her own. In that mirror she whispered, "I forgive you, Ken." Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved the freedom of letting go. Ken, now reduced to a shadow of his former self, found his way to Lizzy's public seminar. He stood among the crowd of strangers, frail and trembling. The once powerful man now looked like any other forgotten face in Abuja's streets. After the session, he gathered the courage to approach her. When their eyes met, the entire room seemed to freeze. The air thickened with unspoken pain. Ken fell to his knees, sobbing not for mercy but from shame. "I came not for pity, Lizzy," he whispered, "but to tell you, you were the only person who truly loved me." The room held its breath. Lizzy walked toward him, helped him up, and simply said, "And that love was wasted the day you saw me as less." She hugged him gently, not out of longing, but out of closure. The crowd wept silently, witnessing a man crumble before the woman he once tried to destroy. Yemi proposed under the stars at the Garden of Hope. It wasn't flashy or extravagant. It was simple, just them, surrounded by women who now called Lizzy their beacon. The ring wasn't the size of her past diamonds, but it sparkled with sincerity. Lizzy smiled, not with the naivety of her past self, but with a heart that finally knew peace. "I am not a princess to be rescued," she told him. "I am a queen who built her castle from rubble." Yemi grinned. "Then I will sit beside you on your throne, not above you." Their wedding became the talk of Abuja, not because of its grandeur, but because of its humility. Instead of politicians and celebrities, they invited widows, orphans, and broken women who once lost their voices. It was a feast of love born not from pain, but from healing. Months after the wedding, a tabloid tried to stir scandal by publishing a story claiming Lizzy seduced Yemi for his wealth. The city's gossip mills spun again, but this time Lizzy didn't flinch. She faced the cameras and owned her narrative. "I gave a man my kidney and he left me because I was fat," she said into the microphones. "Now I love a man who loves me with all my scars. I have nothing to prove to a city that once tried to bury me alive." Her words silenced the room. Abuja cheered and social media exploded with praise. Women across Africa flooded timelines with hashtags like "Lizzy Rises," "Scars and Crowns," and "Hearts She Gave." Lizzy's story became a symbol of Africa's modern woman, strong, unbroken, and unapologetically visible. Lizzy's story culminated in the unveiling of her biggest project yet, a wellness center dedicated to organ donors named Lizzy's Heart. The inauguration gathered dignitaries from across Nigeria, and the president himself cut the ribbon. Ken, now weak and wheelchair-bound, watched quietly from the back, tears rolling down his wrinkled face. Lizzy didn't acknowledge him directly, but as she took the stage, she said, "Some betrayals destroy you, others build you into monuments." Abuja stood still as Lizzy declared, "This city tried to break me, but I rebuilt myself and now I build for others." Because sometimes the heart you give away teaches you how to love yourself first. The ovation shook the city, and as Lizzy walked away from the podium, she looked up at the Abuja skyline, smiling at the woman she had become. Months later, Lizzy received an unexpected invitation. It was from Ken. He was dying. Cancer, the doctor said. She debated whether to visit, unsure if seeing him would reopen old wounds. But Yemi encouraged her. Sometimes the greatest closure is to see the past for what it really is, a closed chapter. Ken was a shadow of the man she once knew. The sparkle in his eye was gone, replaced by regret. He struggled to speak, but his eyes did the talking. Lizzy sat beside him, holding his frail hand, not as a wife, not even as a woman scorned, but as a fellow human facing their end. "I thought money was everything," Ken whispered weakly. "But in the end, no one stands beside me, except the woman I abandoned." Lizzy smiled gently, her tears honest but without bitterness. "Forgiveness was never for you, Ken. It was for me," she whispered, walking away for the final time, lighter than she'd ever felt. At the annual Abuja Women's Leadership Summit, Lizzy delivered a speech that would echo through the ages. She stood before a crowd of thousands, her once timid voice now thunderous with conviction. "You can give a man your heart, your kidney, your body, your youth, but never give him your power." Her speech was raw, filled with stories of pain, betrayal, and triumph. She spoke to the girl in the village who thinks her body is the only currency she has. She spoke to the wife abandoned for a slimmer model. She spoke to every woman who gave too much and was left with too little. That night, her speech trended worldwide. She wasn't just Lizzy of Abuja anymore. She was Lizzy of Africa. Her story, her scars, her lessons became the rallying cry for women to stop shrinking for love and start expanding for themselves. When Ken finally died, his funeral was quiet, almost empty. The Abuja elites stayed away, and the only attendees were a few estranged family members and ex-business partners there out of obligation. Even Bola did not show up. Lizzy sent a wreath, not of roses, but of thorny acacia flowers, symbolizing the painful love they shared. She didn't attend. She chose instead to spend the day hosting a fundraiser for single mothers, using the memory of her pain to fuel the hope of others. The newspapers didn't bother with front-page headlines for Ken's death. His end was as quiet as his beginning had been loud. And as the earth swallowed his body, the city moved on, whispering his name only in hushed cautionary tales. Lizzy no longer needed applause. She traveled, wrote books, and built wellness centers. She loved Yemi in a way that was soft and slow, not the suffocating desperation of her past marriage. On her 40th birthday, she sat with her closest friends under Abuja's stars, reflecting on the girl she once was. She toasted to scars, to heartbreak, to betrayals that taught her who she truly was. "I no longer need to prove myself to anyone," she told her circle. "Not even myself, I am enough as I am." The women clinked glasses, celebrating the queen who didn't just rise again, but built a kingdom no betrayal could crumble. Years later, children would gather in Lizzy's garden of hope, listening to her story. They would touch the mural of her scar and understand it not as a mark of loss, but as a badge of survival. She taught them that betrayal might take your heart, but it should never take your future. That giving shouldn't be reckless, and loving someone should never mean abandoning yourself. And in the final scene of her story, as the camera would pan over Abuja's glowing skyline, Lizzy would smile into the horizon and whisper the words that made her a legend. "I gave my heart away, but I reclaimed my crown." And the world never forgot.